It looks like Cardano's biggest competitor still has a long way to go before we can be justified in no longer calling it a robbery forest. Maybe the most important question at this point is if it will ever be able to escape that stigma or if it will be surpassed by chains that provide a safer experience. Ready? Let's go. Today, we are going to discuss the mysterious stealth drain attacks that have been plaguing Ethereum OGs lately, the Cardano Foundation's annual report, Gary Gensler getting another verbal beatdown and then being sharply corrected by another regulator, and Coinbase already making good on its promises to offshore. If this image made you imagine a lost episode where Joel and Ellie ventured out into the EVM world, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Well, guys, it looks like the robbery forest just keeps getting thicker and darker and spookier. It's almost like we're transitioning into this post-apocalyptic scenario where the robbery forest just overwhelms the city, and all of a sudden we have trees growing out of buildings. It seems like we're headed in that direction with the robbery forest. But it seems not to yet exist on our side of the fence. Cardano seems to have been a very different story as far as security goes so far. This could change anytime, but we seem to be in a very different position as far as security goes. And on the EVM side of the fence, on the Ethereum side, the Ethereum virtual machine side, it seems like things just keep getting worse and worse. So this post says, for the past 48 hours, I've been unwinding a massive wallet draining operation. I don't know how big it is, but since December 22, it's drained 5,000 plus ETH and question mark in tokens, NFTs, coins across 11 plus chains. It's wrecked my friends and OGs who are reasonably secure. And then he's got this gigantic rainbow chart showing exactly what's going on. I love the fact that Cardano and crypto in general contains such smart analytical people that whenever a big exploit goes down, there are a bunch of people who are right on it, and they're very capable people, as you can see from this. But usually they're able to figure out almost immediately what happened. Usually almost immediately the problem is diagnosed, within a day or two. Everybody knows exactly where the failure occurred. Not so with this one. Nobody knows what's going on here. This says, if you are reading this, you're the type to be drained by this. This is not a lowbrow phishing site or a random scammer. It has not wrecked a single noob. It only wrecks OGs. This is peculiar. This is different. If you have all your stuff under a single secret recovery phrase, private key, please be safe, migrate. And we'll talk about this in just a second. But to continue on, he says, as far as I know, no one has determined the source of this compromise. Multiple devices have been forensicked, nothing. And then he lists a few commonalities, but it's not really any common thread, just that the keys were created sometime between 2014 and 2022. Folks are those who are more crypto native than most. For example, multiple addresses, work in the crypto space, etc. So then he's going to go ahead and lay out what he does know, which, is like the pattern of the attacks, what time of day they're occurring, how exactly the attacker is moving the funds, those kinds of things. Interestingly, the attacker will often drain multiple addresses, and then he'll move the funds from one of his victims' accounts to the wallet of a different victim. And then the first victim will go on Twitter and accuse the second victim of being the attacker, which is great because of the .eth names, the ENS domain names. Everybody knows which Twitter personality is attached to which wallet. So everybody's accusing everybody of having attacked them, and the actual attacker is just kind of sitting at home and laughing and all of this. But there are some interesting things. So if we go back up to post 8 here, he says this attacker is draining OG MetaMask users and OG MetaMask employees using MetaMask. He says, I don't know this because of some secret MetaMask intel. I know it because it's easily discernible on chain. So this is interesting. This doesn't seem to be any kind of like common normal, misuse of MetaMask. He's saying that even MetaMask employees are being attacked with this. So this is something new. This is some kind of, some kind of 0-day exploit or something that that no one seems to understand. So hilariously, one of the big responses here was this, and I couldn't have said this better myself. Very good job, Session Cruise. He says, "I'm so sorry this is happening. Respectfully, once y'all get through this, look into Cardano. Its functional programming base amounts to military grade blockchain, while Ethereum's object-oriented programming base amounts to consumer grade. This is why y'all keep getting hacked." And of course, you get the instant response from the .eth person. Nobody cares about Cardano. You know what? The people who got their accounts drained probably do care about the difference between Cardano and Ethereum right now. This next poster says nervously checks his MetaMask wallet every 5 minutes. And he also gets a rebuke from that same .eth poster. If you're nervous, use a hardware wallet. And then the guy comes back and says, just joking. So this is interesting. This is yet another attack. We've seen all kinds of attacks in Ethereum. DeFi platforms get drained, bridges get drained. And, usually it's fairly easy to figure out, what kind of attack on the logic of some smart contract, has been perpetrated, or, it's some kind of an exposure of some private keys or something like that. Nobody seems to know what's going on with this one. I think it'll probably be like most exploits. It'll be figured out in some number of days. But what Session Cruise said there does seem to be true so far. We see this over and over and over again in Ethereum. And granted, part of that is because Ethereum is the biggest treasure chest to attack. It's the biggest bug bounty to attack, the biggest involuntary bug bounty for a black hat exploiter to attack, for sure. So they're going to attack the biggest treasure pot. But there's also something else. If I think about modern cities, it's a fact in most modern cities that there are more robberies in some parts of town. In some neighborhoods, you have more home invasions. In other neighborhoods, you might have 0 home invasions. There are just safer and less safe neighborhoods. And often it doesn't even correlate to how much value there is to be robbed in those houses in the neighborhood where there's a lot of robberies versus the neighborhood where there's none. In fact, often in the very nicest neighborhoods, you have very low crime, whereas in the neighborhoods where there's less to be looted, you have very high crime. It appears the EVM world has become sort of that bad neighborhood. Right now, it still correlates with the biggest treasure chest to be robbed, to be looted, but it's sort of become one of these situations where Ethereum is just the neighborhood where all the crime goes down. And not just Ethereum, but the entire EVM world. And to be fair, people are talking about assets involved in this that are on sort of non-EVM chains. I've heard some references, haven't investigated that closely. But this is sort of the story of the EVM world. We see these exploits over and over and over again. And our conjecture in Cardano has been that our functionally programmed smart contracts will be safer. And part of that is because there are fewer functional programmers in the world. It's a lot easier for someone to, figure out how to attack a Solidity contract than it is to figure out how to attack a functionally programmed smart contract. And part of that might just be because there are way more people who can understand Solidity contracts than there are who can understand, like a Haskell-based contract like we have with our Plutus Cardano smart contracts. But there are also a lot of arguments that functional programmers would put forward about how functional programming is fundamentally safer than something like a Solidity. And so far, the experience we've had seems to back this up. True, smart contracts are much, much younger in Cardano than they are in the EVM world. And there's way, way more people involved in EVM world smart contracts than Cardano smart contracts. But so far, one of those two neighborhoods seems to be a pretty safe, nice neighborhood. And the other one still seems to be this terrible robbery forest that just gets worse and worse and worse. So, of course, I'm going to tell you, if you're going to build a house, don't build it in the middle of robbery forests. Build it in the safe neighborhood. Build it somewhere like Cardano. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but so far, Cardano has been a much safer neighborhood than right square in the middle of robbery forest. So, but that'll change. We will have big exploits in Cardano. We'll have some large exploits in Cardano. That will happen. We're not so lucky that it'll never happen in Cardano. It's just that so far it looks like it's going to be much, much, much less frequent than over in the robbery forest. So because it will happen eventually in Cardano, there are a few things you should be aware of. The same advice we always discuss when this kind of thing happens is the same advice this poster is giving here. He says, please don't keep all your assets in a single key or secret phrase for years. Split up your assets. Get a hardware wallet. Migrate now. Of course, this is the advice I always give. Get a hardware wallet and use your hardware wallet. But there are some things you need to remember even with a hardware wallet, and it comes up in this thread. If we go to the very bottom of the thread, you can see he explains something that everybody should keep in mind. He says, to be completely clear, this is not a MetaMask specific exploit. Users of all wallets, even those created on a hardware wallet or generated for the Ethereum presale, have been impacted by this. How much does that suck? You might have generated a wallet for the Ethereum presale, and then you got drained in 2023. That is a terrible, tragic story. But the important part here is that even some of these wallets that were created on a hardware wallet were drained. So what I'm assuming about this is that the following happened, something you should never, ever do. Getting a hardware wallet is great, but doing the following thing is terrible. Do not get a hardware wallet. Have it produce your seed phrase for you, and then put your seed phrase on something digital that might ever be connected to the internet. Do not store your seed phrase on your laptop that will be connected to the internet. Do not put your seed phrase in the cloud anywhere. In fact, do not put your seed phrase on anything digital. There's not really a good reason to put your seed phrase on anything digital. You can just put your seed phrase on something like paper. There's a reason why Ledger gives you that piece of paper with the line for every single one of your secret words, because they don't want you to store that somewhere in your laptop where attackers might be able to get at it. If you're worried about paper, because paper doesn't do well if there's like a flood or a fire, you can get metal, and you can put your seed phrase on metal. There are a bunch of different companies that will sell you metal made specifically for this. They'll sell you a piece of steel, and you can scrawl your seed phrase in that piece of steel. Sounds like a pain, but it's worth it, because then you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about something like this happening. At least you don't have to worry about your seed phrase being discoverable somehow by exploiters, because what they will do is figure out a way to access your digitally stored seed phrase. But what is much, 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 much less common is that you have your seed phrase stored on some physical object in the real world, and they somehow seek you out, go to your house and find that seed phrase. True, somebody could discover your seed phrase, but the chances of that happening so far seem to be much, much lower than the scenario that probably happened here, where people of all types probably stored their seed phrases somewhere digital, and those seed phrases were discoverable by the attackers. So do not store your seed phrases anywhere digital. Store them in the real world, in the physical world. Back in the world of Cardano, things are still sunny, cheery, and bright. We've got a brand new annual report for 2022 from the Cardano Foundation. And if we scroll through this baby, you can see we've got Peaky Blinders thinking deep thoughts about all kinds of blockchain Cardano things. We're a very stylish bunch over here in Cardano, which I love. I want to draw your attention to this, though. check out some of these stats. These are stats as of December 31, 2022. 57.9 million transactions, 4.775 million native assets minted, 1.25 million delegated wallets, 7.4 million total assets minted, 3.83 million wallets. Cardano is huge. We're always sort of like disappointed that we're not bigger in Cardano, which is great. We're ambitious. We are an ambitious bunch. But it is good to reflect on what we have accomplished. This is pretty huge. If you build a network as an ecosystem, as a community, if you're involved in a network, I don't want to take credit for the work that the founding entities have done necessarily, but as a community, I think we've all played some role in the buildup of this network, this whole ecosystem. If you build a network that does 57.9 million transactions, you've built something gigantic. Cardano is gigantic. We sort of lose sight of that sometimes. I think we suffer sometimes from little brother syndrome, and we never quite realize how wonderful this thing we've built really is. But some of these numbers really bear that out. I admit it, I cannot get enough of these Gary Gensler verbal beatdowns. This happened so many times yesterday. People didn't even notice all the times Gary Gensler got beat down by different members of Congress. But this clip right here didn't get quite as much attention. But I think Representative Donalds really hits the nail on the head here. He identifies the crux of the problem and the real intellectual dishonesty that's driving everybody crazy about Gary Gensler. So just listen to this clip. Listen to what he asks him.
But once again, Congress has never given you a framework for regulating digital assets. Where are you pulling that one from?
With all respect, sir, we disagree on this.
Oh, I can see we disagree a lot, Chairman, because we're not giving you authority. You're just taking it. I think that's part of the issue right now.
With all respect, Congress painted with a broad brush when they set up the SEC, and I quote Thurgood Marshall, which is one of the greatest.
Congress painted with a broad brush in 1933 and 1934, not in 2023. We've not touched that. It's a new industry. One last quick question, because
So the next question he asks is super hilarious, but not really related to crypto. I strongly suggest you go listen to that too, because it's even funnier, but not related to crypto. But I think Representative Donalds is really hitting the nail on the head here. The whole problem is that Gary Gensler is relying on legislative authority that was granted to the SEC in 1933. 1934, those were the years of the Securities Act and the Securities Exchange Act, the 33 and the 34 Act. It is now almost a century later, and the way Representative Donalds put this is absolutely correct. Congress has never given the SEC any kind of authority whatsoever when it comes to digital assets, especially not in 1933 and 1934, because there wasn't digital anything in the 30s. That was in the pre-digital age. It's absurd for the SEC to be claiming authority to regulate something that didn't even exist last time they were given authority to do anything. It turns out that it's not just members of Congress who are against Gary Gensler and this anti-crypto agenda of the current administration. Even other regulators are turning against Gensler and this whole anti-crypto agenda. Here you're going to see Gary Gensler speaking yesterday on Tuesday, and then you're going to see Adrienne Harris, the superintendent of the New York Department of Financial Service, speaking today on Wednesday. And you're going to see that the difference between these two regulators is that Adrienne Harris actually believes in intellectual honesty.
Well, if I could just note something about you. You mentioned your hearing about the recent events in the markets, and I would note there were 3 banks that failed in those handful of days, those 4 or 5 days. And 2 of those banks, the first and the third that failed, Silvergate and Signature, were engaged in the crypto business. I mean, some would say they were, crypto banks. So it's interesting just how this was all had some crypto narrative as well.
It is a misnomer that the failure of Signature Bank was related to crypto. What we saw with Signature Bank is that it had a new-fashioned bank run, and the outflow of deposits were from a broad depositor base, including wholesale food vendors, fiduciaries, trust accounts, law firms, And in fact, the outflow of crypto deposits were in exact proportion to their representation in the depositor base overall. And in fact, some of those deposit outflows were actually pre-planned. So it's, of course, unfortunate that there was a run on the bank at Signature prompted by what we saw with SVB, but it is not the case that the failure of Signature was related to crypto.
In more good news for Gary Gensler, it looks like Coinbase has followed through on its threats to start offshoring more business. This is a Fortune Crypto article called Coinbase Gets Bermuda License, Plans to Launch Offshore Exchange in Coming Weeks. So we often see people in crypto and institutions in crypto kind of, threatening to offshore their business. Coinbase made that threat like last week, days ago, and they've already figured out how to launch looks like, according to this article, a derivatives exchange in Bermuda, as opposed to doing that inside the United States. A lot of people on Twitter are posting, "Good job, Gary," because it's actually exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to shut down crypto in the United States because that's the agenda of the current administration to whom he is beholden, and it looks like it's working. And the victim of all this, the true victim of all this, will just be the United States, because we'll have fewer and fewer businesses in this important nascent industry within the borders of the United States. Hopefully, this trend will reverse. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.